So I got to tell you, when I saw this yesterday break and then I read more about it, I thought, where have we heard this before? And I can't believe the similarities to what happened, of course, with Tezos back in 2017,
Right.
with very similar problems and some of
Yeah,
the
but
same
this
people
is totally
involved, I might
different. This
add.
is totally different. Okay,
Sure.
so with all due respect, these are apples to oranges. And Arthur and Kathleen went and attacked me on Twitter, and said I was a bad guy and haha karma. Look, it's a totally different situation. In the case of Tezos, you have a situation where there's a founder of a project who wants to control the entire project end to end, but he doesn't want any of the liabilities. So what he does is he creates this organization over in Switzerland. He loads it up with all the money and then wires in all these contracts to guarantee a payout. Okay,
Mhm.
and and then the guy that they put in charge of that didn't want to play ball, and then they fought, and he said, "No, you got to do it my way." He says, "No, I want to do it my way." And eventually, they got in this huge public spat. And the reality was, if they didn't resolve it, Tezos dies. The ecosystem dies because the foundation was in control of everything. They had all the money. They could go and fire Arthur, hire somebody else. Okay. Like our
Mhm.
case, the foundation's a value add to the ecosystem, where it has a collection of duties and responsibilities that are for the community. But whether it does these things or not doesn't stop development. Does these things or not doesn't start partnership and business development. And because of the triumvirate structure, we had resiliency. So if it fails, two other entities can step in and fill in for it and continue moving the project along. It's a
Mhm.
frustration for me because it gives me more work to do. As I mentioned, I've had to go to 27 countries. A lot of these trips were just to facilitate that community management and evangelism role that the foundation was responsible for. So, it makes me fatter and I get more gray hair in my beard and I get older, but it doesn't slow it down the project at all. And, they can't tell me what to do. Or if they could, I sure as hell wouldn't have been able to publish an open letter. So this is apples to oranges. And another thing is that the money's not going anywhere, and at some point the situation will get resolved. So it's not a death knell to the project or an existential threat to the project. It's more of just a profound disappointment that it got this far, and
Mhm.
a realization that we have to do things differently. And so the letter was basically us, Amergo and IOHK, saying to the community, we're going to do things differently moving forward. And at some point, this third entity will come back into the fold. And when it does, it'll add more value to the ecosystem. The case of Tezos, if they didn't resolve it, the project would die because nothing could get done. No one could get paid. No direction could be taken. There was a potential that the founder of the project could be fired, Arthur.
Mhm.
So I think they're totally different situations.
Well, they are different. Yes, it's certainly the ways that you outline, but I do feel like you have more, like you said, a triumvirate organizational structure where you've got other organizations outside of just relying on the foundation. But it's amazing to me that the foundation itself, those problems of inaction, no response to the community, they're so similar to the way that the
Right.
Tezos Foundation was acting, and that's what struck me as wondering, like, what is up with this Swiss Foundation? Uh,
But you also have to understand something about Swiss foundations is that
Mhm.
they're not used to being cryptocurrency foundations.
Right.
Historically, it's like something you create to put your art into, and then you have a curator or something. It was never intended
Mhm.
to have this type of model. So the regulatory apparatus and the governance apparatus for it is a bit slower, and it's more private than you would expect for a community-led organization. So that is one downside to the foundation model, but there is regulatory infrastructure there. When you create a foundation, it has a mandate, has an
Mhm.
actual collection of duties it must perform. And if the agents running it don't do that, they could face jail time. So there's a very strong stick there. And the regulator ISA is capable of doing all kinds of things, including purging the entire board. The problem is that they don't work in a matter of days to weeks. They work in a matter of months to years, because when these disputes occur, they're usually very private Swiss-oriented disputes, like two families are fighting over grandpa's original intent when he set up with the gold trust or something like that.
Mhm.
Where should this go? Or some 500-year-old religious institution is working with 200-year-old municipality, and they're fighting over some parcel of land. And there you can get everybody in the room and talk about it, and it takes months to haggle, but eventually you come to a brokered solution.
Mhm.
Cryptocurrency has this expectation of, if it's not solved today, it's a scam. If it's not solved today, it's a crisis and everything's going to fall apart. So in a way, it's a double-edged sword, because you do get the credibility and certainty of the Swiss jurisdiction and great regulators and great law enforcement mechanisms, and a lot of certainty that things will be done correctly in the long arc. But on the other edge of the blade, the one towards your face, it's a situation where things move very slowly, which is why you don't put the foundation in charge of things like software development. You don't put the foundation in charge of things like scientific research, because you need to be very agile and nimble there and very responsive there. Whereas other things which, ought to be easier to manage, like giving grants for community development, that's a situation where the foundation decides Bob is doing a great job. Let's give Bob $50,000 to run a radio show for the next year. That's something that you can do in a slow and methodical quarter by quarter basis, because once the funds are allocated, you have agility at the edges. So is it perfect? No. If we had a do-over, would things been done probably differently? Of course. But, that's the nature of governance. The last point of it is that all cryptocurrencies must face a governance crisis for them to get to the next level. Bitcoin had Bitcoin Cash, Ethereum had Ethereum Classic, Ripple had the issues with JED. There is no way for you to get to the next level until you have some event occur. And the ability to overcome that event is what tells you that cryptocurrency is going to be around for a long time. Even Bitcoin itself had to survive the loss of its founder, Satoshi, and it's still going strong, and it's got a great ecosystem behind it. So similarly, we're no different, and Cardano has to overcome this little blip. But the great thing that really encourages me is that the ecosystem is quite strong. I mean, the guardians of Cardano came together autonomously and wrote a letter and saying, we're just fed up. And I said, you know what, if they're going to write a letter, I'll support the effort, and I'll write a letter too and explain that we're fed up as well. And you know what, it's not going to stop us. The guardians are going to go do their thing. They'll probably build a counter foundation. We'll do our thing too. And we'll overcome this whole situation. And then moving forward, we'll have a much better way of running things.
Right. Well, that does seem to be how it's played out for Tezos, which once you get on the other side of this kind of almost staggering loss of communication with this stuff, and as long as you've got a community that's going to come together and want to continue to push this project forward because the technology is there and you see great opportunity, that seems to be what drives it. I did reach out to Arthur Brightman over this just to see what his thoughts were, and he did respond and say that Cardano is a cool project with a great community, and I wish them the best through this snag. So what do you think about that?
So why would he say horrible things about me on Twitter then? So he says to you nice things, but on Twitter and in the Tezos forum, they attack me. Look, I like Arthur, and I like his wife. They're not bad people. I think they're engineers and lawyers, and they had some cool, interesting ideas with Tezos. And actually, Tezos has some similarities to Cardano. Cardano is written Haskell. Think about formal methods. They're written OCaml, and they think about formal methods. And we're both interested in blockchain-based governance. We have radically different philosophies about things like proof of stake and how to handle the smart contract side of things. And we've been a bit more ambitious with a multi-layer architecture than they have been. Their argument is because of the governance system, they can iterate to those types of formats, whereas we decided to launch with a slightly more ambitious roadmap. And that's fine. So I do have some respect for the work that they've done and the people that they hang out with and the code they've written. My whole issue with their governance crisis was that I felt their governance crisis came as a result of trying to build a structure where they could have their cake and eat it too. I built a structure with other people where I could deliver my chunk of the pie, and I'm able to do that. I made sure that we got paid before there was any major involvement, because I wouldn't be able to actually guarantee to the community IOHK can be here until 2020. If I had some untrusted third-party entity, dripping money to me and cutting it off anytime we have a philosophical disagreement. Second, the most important long-term growth vehicle is Emergo. I mean, look at what Consensus has done for Ethereum. It took Ethereum from an interesting scientific project to the Ethereum of today. And that company is going very strong. They have, I think, well over 100 million. And they have a great team of people, Manmeet Singh and Nico and Sebastian and Kadama, and they'll get where they need to go. So the most critical components of our ecosystem were planned in a way where we have some good checks and balances and good structures in place to get it where it needs to go. We failed, I think, at trying to build a good foundation. There was a lot of trust where there should have been stronger, rigorous guarantees. To be fair to us, when it was started, Foundation had a board of 4, and they were diverse people, different people from different walks of life. They were all close to Parsons, but we never imagined that attrition would winnow it away to 2 people and there would never be replacements. And there was also it was unimaginable to us that they would deviate from the original idea. because it was basically autopilot. You know, you go and build a diverse board of 5 to 7, you bring in a strong executive director, and then you ride off into the sunset, the founder of a great project, and you get to say, hey, we did some good for the world. And we tried to make it as easy as possible for everybody to do that. Whereas their plan is not discernible, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to us. So, getting back to the Tezos affair, I wish them well, and I understand they have a lot of hardship and struggle up ahead. I mean, it's difficult to compete in these markets. There's certainly having U.S. presence creates some issues for them, and there's a lot of cleanup that has to happen from the events of Gavers and so forth. I had some personal exposure to Gavers. He actually, this was another thing why I commented on the issue back in January. Gavers actually wanted to be the head of or related to the Ethereum Foundation back when I was CEO of Ethereum, the Ethereum GmbH. And we did some diligence there, and we interacted with him, and we said, this guy, he's super charismatic, he's very nice, but we just don't feel that it would be wise to put him in that kind of a position. And I'd known Arthur before he selected Johan or did the ICO for Tezos, and I, Amir Shakrit, and others did offer him a lot of advice, including, you maybe would consider a different way of structuring things. They decided to go off and structure it a completely different way, and they brought a guy in that obviously in hindsight they didn't fully understand and appreciate, who was also very ambitious and had already an entrepreneur of his own company, and it blew up in their face. With Parsons, old guy, 70, he's not going to go be an entrepreneur, and he's not going to go set up the next Microsoft. So his job was to be a custodian and fill out the board with qualified people. And, he had a long history of success in that respect, working at Emirates Bank and, being a CPA and, interfacing with people in the city of London and so forth. And, he had done some great work, Isle of Man and Gibraltar. So the resume and the history and the age was very different from the resume and history of age of Johan Gavers. And I had personal exposure to Johan. So I just felt that Arthur made a mistake, and we told him that. And then it turned into a big debacle. And then we're like, well, we kind of told you so on that one. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's just also competitiveness. Look, there's a lot of similarities between Tezos and Cardano, and we compete for the same pool of functional programmers and the same type of mindset about how things ought to be done. We're much ahead of them in market cap, about 3 times over them, 2 to 3 depending upon the trading day. And they're trying to climb up that food chain, and they have a fiduciary obligation to climb up that food chain, and they want to have growth in their ecosystem. So they're obviously going to say things publicly, and it's just like a boxing match or an MMA fight. When Mayweather and McGregor get together, they say a lot of crazy stuff, and then at some point you relax. And I think it's the same situation here.